For thousands of years, we were strangers on this planet. Not rulers of it, just visitors. Small bands of people wandering through vast forests, across endless plains, always moving, always searching. Every single morning started with the same burning question. Where is the food going to come from today? Life was a constant negotiation with nature. Some days you found berries, roots, maybe a kill. Other days, nothing. You were either the hunter or the hunted, and there wasn't a lot of gray area in between. Your eyes didn't scan the horizon for beauty. They scanned it for danger. Your ears didn't listen for music. They listened for the rustle in the bushes that might mean a predator was closing in. There was no home, no address, just the temporary shelter of a cave or a rocky overhang before you moved on again. The only goal that mattered was making it to tomorrow. But then, around 12,000 years ago, something happened. Something so quiet, so gradual that nobody even noticed it at first. A shift so fundamental that it would eventually build every city, every empire, every civilization that has ever existed on this earth. It started not with a great warrior or a powerful king, but likely with a woman on her knees in the dirt, pressing a seed into wet soil. This is the story of how primitive man learned to farm. And it changed absolutely everything. To understand just how radical that change was, you have to first understand what life actually looked like before it. Picture the world as it was around 15,000 years ago. No cities, no villages, no fields stretching to the horizon. This was the Paleolithic and early Mesolithic era, the longest chapter of human history spanning millions of years. Our ancestors lived in small bands of roughly 20 to 30 people, constantly on the move, following food. Everything revolved around the seasons and the animals. When the berries in one valley ran out, the group packed up and moved. When the herds migrated, people followed. There was no staying put. Permanence wasn't an option. And here's the thing people always get wrong about those early humans. They weren't stupid, not even close. They were extraordinarily skilled at reading the natural world. They knew which plants were poisonous and which were edible. They could track animals across miles of terrain from the faintest footprint. They could predict weather patterns from the color of the sky. They had mastered fire, probably the first true revolution in human history, which gave them warmth, protection, cooked food that was easier to digest, and a way to process more nutrients from the same amount of meat. Their tools were simple but effective. Stones chipped and ground into blades, scrapers and spear points. Life was hard, yes, but there was also a strange kind of equality to it. Nobody owned anything because there was nothing to own. Whatever the group found, the group shared. The cave paintings found at sites like Lascaux in France or Altamira in Spain, 30,000 years old and still vivid, show us that even in the middle of this brutal existence, there was an artist alive inside them. They painted the animals they hunted, the rituals they performed, the world as they saw it. They were fully, completely human. But for roughly 96% of human history, this is how we lived. Moving, hunting, gathering, surviving. And then the world shifted, literally. The pivotal moment came in a period scientists call the Younger Dryas, roughly 12,900 to 11,700 years ago. If you've never heard of it, here's the short version. The climate went completely sideways. As the last ice age was slowly releasing its grip on the planet, something strange interrupted the warming trend. A massive influx of cold fresh water, melting from glaciers, poured into the North Atlantic Ocean. This disrupted the ocean's circulation currents, the same currents that act like a giant conveyor belt distributing heat around the planet. The result was dramatic and swift. Temperatures plummeted, forests shrank. The great megafauna, the woolly mammoths, the giant elk, the cave bears, began disappearing. The landscapes that hunter-gatherer communities had depended on for millennia started turning hostile. Archaeological sites like Abu Huraira in modern-day Syria tell the story clearly. The plant and animal remains found in those ancient sediment layers show a community under severe pressure. The traditional food sources were collapsing. The game was gone. The forests were gone. People were desperate. And desperation, it turns out, is one of the most powerful forces in human history. Imagine it, a woman gathering wild grasses along the banks of a river, scraping every last seed head she can find, trying to collect enough to feed her people through another brutal week. Some of those seeds fall, scattered in the damp soil near where the group has camped. A few weeks later, maybe after a short rain, she notices something. Small green shoots pushing up from the ground exactly where those seeds had fallen. She sees what no one had fully understood before. That seeds aren't just food. They're potential. They're a promise. Plant them and they come back to you, multiplied. That realization was probably the single most consequential thought in human history. Now, to be clear to Salem, this wasn't a sudden eureka moment for one person in one place. The transition to agriculture was slow, messy, and happened independently in multiple regions across thousands of years. But the underlying insight that you could grow your food instead of chasing it, that was the spark. And once it caught, it never went out. If you're enjoying this journey through human prehistory, make sure to subscribe. We publish new documentaries on the ancient world every week. The spark caught first in a region that historians call the Fertile Crescent, a sweeping arc of land stretching across parts of modern-day Israel, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. The name tells you everything. The soil was rich. Rivers like the Tigris and Euphrates carried silt and water across the landscape. Wild grasses, the ancient ancestors of modern wheat and barley, grew thick along the river valleys. Conditions were almost perfect. Around 10,000 years before the Common Era, the first deliberate farmers appeared here. They weren't farming the way we think of farming today. It was rough, experimental, full of failure. But they were intentionally planting seeds and waiting for harvests. That was new. That was revolutionary. The early crops were things like einkorn wheat, emmer wheat, barley, lentils, peas, and chickpeas. But those wild varieties were a nightmare to work with. The seed heads were small and brittle. When they ripened, they shattered apart and scattered on the ground, making them nearly impossible to harvest efficiently. So what did the early farmers do? Without knowing it, they became the world's first genetic engineers. Season after season, they selected the best seeds, the ones from plants whose heads held together longest, whose grains were largest, whose yield was highest. They replanted those seeds the following year, and the next, and the next. Over thousands of years, this unconscious selection process transformed wild, scraggly grasses into the robust, high-yield crops that would eventually feed civilizations. It was slow-motion evolution guided by human hands. Tools evolved alongside the crops. The heavy, crude stone choppers of the Paleolithic gave way to finer, more specialized implements. Polished stone hoes for turning soil, flint-bladed sickles for cutting grain, and grinding stones for processing it into flour. These tools look simple to modern eyes, but they were high technology for their time. They made farming possible at scale. And farming didn't stay in the Fertile Crescent. It erupted independently across the globe as if the idea was simply waiting to be discovered wherever conditions were right. In China's Yangtze and Yellow River valleys around 9,000 years ago, communities began cultivating wild rice. In the Americas, the ancient ancestors of modern corn, A tiny grass called teosinte, barely recognizable as the ancestor of a corn cob, was slowly domesticated in what is now Mexico, beginning perhaps 8,000 years ago. In sub-Saharan Africa, sorghum and millet were brought under cultivation. In New Guinea, taro and banana. The agricultural revolution wasn't a single event. It was a wave, rolling slowly across the entire world. Closer to the Indian subcontinent, one of the most important early agricultural sites in all of South Asia appeared at a place called Mehrgarh, in what is now the Balochistan province of Pakistan. Archaeologists have found evidence at Mehrgarh dating back to 7,000 years before the Common Era. Evidence of people growing wheat and barley, herding sheep and goats, storing grain in purpose-built mud brick structures, and even cultivating cotton. That last one is staggering. Some of the earliest evidence of cotton cultivation anywhere in the world comes from this site, predating the Indus Valley civilization by thousands of years. Mehrgarh wasn't a fluke. It was a full-scale agricultural community, a living proof that farming had independently taken root across vast stretches of the ancient world. Farming also brought an immediate new problem. How do you store what you've grown? That challenge gave birth to another invention that seems mundane but was genuinely world-changing: pottery. Early farmers learned to shape wet clay into containers and harden them in fire, creating vessels that could protect grain from moisture and pests for months. Suddenly, you could save food across seasons. You could plan ahead. The future existed in a way it never had before. Now here's where things get really interesting, because the effects of farming didn't stop at the dinner table. They rippled outward into every corner of human existence, reshaping society from the ground up in ways that are still visible in the world we live in today. The first and most obvious change was permanence. A farmer can't wander. You plant your crops, you stay with them, you protect them through the growing season. You harvest them, store them, and plant again the following spring. This need to stay put gave rise to something humans had never really had before: a home. Not a cave used for a few nights, but a fixed place that was yours season after season. Villages formed. Jericho in the modern-day West Bank is one of the oldest continuously occupied settlements on Earth, dating back around 11,000 years. Mehrgarh is another. These early villages were small and simple, but they were the embryos of every city that would ever exist. Settlement also enabled something else: the accumulation of animals. Hunter-gatherers had always hunted, but now certain communities began realizing there was a smarter approach. Instead of killing animals and moving on, why not keep them? Goats and sheep were likely the first to be domesticated, followed by cattle and pigs. These animals weren't just walking meat lockers. Sheep provided wool. Cows and goats provided milk. Oxen could pull a plow, dramatically multiplying the amount of land a small group of farmers could cultivate. The relationship between humans and animals changed permanently. Then came surplus, and surplus changed everything. In a hunter-gatherer band, everyone hunted or gathered. There was no other option. But once farming became efficient enough to produce more food than the farmers themselves needed, something remarkable happened. Not everyone had to farm anymore. For the first time in human history, some people could specialize. A man who was especially good at shaping clay could spend his days making pots, trading them for grain. A woman skilled at weaving could produce cloth. Others learned to work with copper and bronze. Craftspeople, traders, priests, soldiers. None of these roles are possible unless someone else is growing your food. This division of labor was the engine that would eventually build civilization. But surplus also had a darker side. For the first time, some people had more than others. In a hunter-gatherer band, no one owned the forest. The land belonged to everyone and no one. But in an agricultural society, the land was the source of all wealth, and the land could be owned, claimed, defended. This is my field. That was a new idea, a dangerous idea. Inequality was born. The person with more land had more grain, more animals, more power. Villages needed leadership to manage disputes, organize harvests, protect stored food. Chiefs emerged, then kings, then soldiers to fight for those kings, then walls to protect what the kings had accumulated. War, organized, strategic, territorial war, is fundamentally an agricultural invention. Hunter-gatherers had conflict, but there was no fixed territory worth dying for. Farming created something worth taking, and so it became worth killing for. Population exploded. A nomadic mother could only care for one infant at a time while walking dozens of miles each week. A settled farmer could have children more frequently with other community members to help. More food meant more people survived infancy. Villages grew into towns. Towns grew into cities. By 5,000 years ago, cities like Uruk in Mesopotamia held tens of thousands of people. Numbers that would have been utterly unimaginable to a Paleolithic hunter. Now here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. Was all of this actually progress? The historian Jared Diamond famously called the adoption of agriculture the worst mistake in the history of the human race. That's a provocative claim, but there's real evidence behind it. Hunter-gatherers, it turns out, were in many ways healthier than the first farmers. Studies of ancient skeletons show a stark difference. At sites where the transition from hunting to farming occurred, human skeletons after the transition are shorter, show more dental decay, more signs of malnutrition, and more bone damage from repetitive physical stress. The diversity of a hunter-gatherer diet, dozens of different plants, animals, roots, and fruits throughout the year, was replaced by a narrow reliance on a handful of crops. If wheat was your staple and the wheat failed, you starved, and starvation was now a real possibility in a way it hadn't been before. Hunter-gatherers had resilience through diversity. Farmers had efficiency but fragility. One drought, one flood, one plague of locusts, and an entire village faced famine. Then there were diseases. When thousands of people live in close quarters alongside their animals, germs thrive. Measles, smallpox, and influenza are all believed to have jumped from domesticated animals to humans in the early agricultural period. In small nomadic bands, an epidemic burns out quickly. There aren't enough people to sustain it. In a village, it spreads like wildfire, and the workload. Hunter-gatherers, by most anthropological estimates, worked somewhere between 15 and 20 hours per week to secure their food. Farmers worked from sunrise to sunset every day through every season. The skeletal evidence is clear. Early farmers had arthritis, stress fractures, and worn joints at rates far higher than their nomadic predecessors. So was it a mistake? Probably not, but not because it was painless. It was a trap, in a way. Once farming took hold and populations grew, there was no going back. A community of 1,000 people cannot feed itself by hunting and gathering. The land simply can't support it. Agriculture was a one-way door. Once humanity walked through it, the old world was gone forever. What we got in exchange was civilization, the capacity to build, to accumulate knowledge, to develop writing, art, science, philosophy. All of those things required people who weren't spending every waking hour searching for food. Farming created that space. It was a painful, unequal, often brutal bargain, but it was the bargain that made us who we are. Think about that for a second. Right now, you're watching this on a screen that was designed by engineers, manufactured in a factory, shipped across oceans, and delivered to your door. The city or town you live in, the government that governs it, the language you're reading this in, none of it exists without agriculture. The entire stack of human achievement rests on the foundation that some anonymous person built when they pressed a seed into the ground 12,000 years ago. Farming gave us time. Time to think, to question, to create. Time to look up at the stars and ask what they were. Time to build temples and write poems and argue about philosophy. Time to make mistakes and learn from them and try again. When the stomach is full, the mind is free. Villages became cities. Cities became empires. Empires built libraries. Libraries preserved knowledge across generations. And that accumulated knowledge eventually led to the world you're living in right now. The road wasn't straight. It was paved with inequality, famine, disease, and war. The challenges that were born alongside agriculture, climate vulnerability, environmental degradation, food inequality, are still with us today in new forms. But the story of that first seed is ultimately the story of human potential. It's the proof that an idea, one quiet, simple observation, can rewrite the fate of an entire species. Next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment. Think about the wheat in your bread, the rice in your bowl, the corn in that tortilla. Think about the 10,000 years of selection, cultivation, and refinement that went into that single grain. Think about the nameless woman in the Fertile Crescent who noticed a shoot growing from a fallen seed and understood, for the first time, that the future could be planted. She didn't know what she was starting, she couldn't have. But she started it anyway, and that changed everything. If you liked this video, subscribe. We drop documentaries like this all the time, and there's so much more of this story left to tell. And if you want a part 2 where we dig even deeper into what happened after farming took hold, the rise of the first cities, the birth of writing, the earliest empires, drop a part 2 in the comments. Trust me, where this story goes next is just as wild.